What's going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got a video of Apple's newest smartphones for this year and their flagships, the iPhone 11 Pro and the iPhone 11 Pro Max. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the new features, improvements, and whether or not these features really make sense, they're a worthy upgrade of a previous generation, and also whether or not the $300 price difference between the 11 and the 11 Pro makes sense. So the starting price point of the iPhone 11 Pro this year is $999, which is the same as the iPhone XS from last year, and it starts at just 64 gigs of storage, which is probably the first thing that I would say they really got to bump up to 128, especially at that price. There's already a few things that I really like about the iPhone 11 Pro, and that's the fact that the battery life is much improved, as well as the wide-angle camera, the camera improvements in general, and also iOS 13 has actually been pretty good to me, despite some people saying that they're having some early bugs. If you guys would like to enter or win an iPhone 11 that I'm giving away on the channel, just make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like on this video, and also leave a comment down below, and follow me over on Instagram and Twitter, as I'm going to be announcing the winner there at the end of October. If you would like some extra ways to enter, just make sure you have post notifications on and leave a comment on some other iPhone 11 videos that I have coming up soon. So looking at the front, the iPhone 11 Pro lineup has pretty much stayed the same in terms of looks as the iPhone XS and the iPhone X. There's really no changes there. The notch is still very large. It is the same size, but this year Face ID is also improved by around 30% in terms of speed, which is always welcome. The display itself comes in a 5.8 as well as a 6.5-inch option, and this is what Apple calls a Super Retina XDR screen. And in terms of what it looks like, it is very similar to the previous generation, but it is a little bit brighter with a sustained brightness of 800 nits and up to 1200 nits in the brightest situations. Overall, when it comes to the OLED display experience, the colors are still very vibrant, the contrast is definitely there with a 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio, and there is of course HDR support, and this altogether is what Apple calls a Super Retina XDR display, which is kind of just a name title that goes with it, but in general, the changes from last year in terms of the screen itself, you're really not going to notice a major difference at all. One thing that I did really wish Apple would have on this year's phone though was a higher refresh rate, kind of like what we saw on the iPad and what we saw on the OnePlus 7 Pro this year, which had 90 Hz, and I think that was an excellent feature that I really enjoyed, and I just really hope Apple does that next year because I feel like that was something that they could have put in this year. This year, Apple also did remove 3D Touch, which honestly I didn't really use a single time at all since it was introduced a few years ago, so unlike the headphone jack, I don't think anybody misses this feature. This phone in general is protected by the world's strongest glass, but I have to say I've had this phone for just a few days and it has already been scratched on the front, so I don't really know how valid that claim really is. On the back of the phone, the design this year is a little bit different with kind of a frosted finish. It is still all glass, and on the top you have the glossy finish as well as a triple camera setup, which does stick out a little bit, but there's a lot underneath it. The Apple logo hasn't moved over to the middle, and there is no branding or anything on the bottom unless you're in Europe, because by law they have to have that over there. The phone itself this year is also a little bit thicker, but that is for good reason because you have a larger battery, but it does also come in at a weight at 20 grams heavier than the previous generation XS Max. That is definitely a good direction that Apple is heading though, because if you might have seen with the MacBook Pro for example, where thermal throttling was a major issue because of it being so thin, it is nice that they finally kind of gotten away from being the thinnest phone, but instead giving what customers want, and that is a bigger battery. If you want a great way to protect your iPhone 11 Pro though, this case right here is the Defense Shield. And this right here can withstand drops as well as scratches of course, and it is made out of super durable materials, including anodized aluminum as well as a rubber bumper and also a plastic back. This gives you good shock protection on the corner, and you're able to still see the beauty of your phone on the back, and I think this color right here goes very well with the gray color of the iPhone 11 Pro. All the cutouts are very well done, and the buttons are very tactile. You've got a bumper that lips over the front to protect the screen. A small touch and a great detail is the acoustic channel that they put into the front of the case that directs the sound of the bottom firing speaker out to the front. If you guys want 20% off your Defense brand phone case, just use the code JTech20 for the discount. I'm going to drop all the links down below, and a huge thanks to Defense brand for sponsoring this video. So I think the biggest thing that you guys are really wondering about is a triple camera setup on the back of the iPhone 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max. It definitely isn't the prettiest. I mean, it sticks out a little bit. They're pretty large discs that just look like eyes peeking out of the back of the phone. But I mean, if the camera quality is good, I'm all for it. And I definitely feel like the expectations have been lived up to, if not even exceeded in some areas, in the camera setup this year for this flagship iPhone. It is a triple camera setup with a main camera that has an f1.8 aperture, as well as a 2.0 on the telephoto and 2.4 on the wide angle, and that also has a 120-degree field of view. Beginning with the main camera, I think that is where the biggest changes we're seeing this year, and that is the fact that the camera not only did an excellent job in terms of exposure, but also white balance and the sharpness and just the way it rendered all these different objects with the Smart HDR. Although HDR is not something that you want to use all the time, when it did work, it actually did a very good job in the fact that it is a new rendering system. It takes 4 underexposed images as well as 1 overexposed, and it also has smart object identification that kind of distinguishes between hair, the face, as well as objects and the background. Obviously, the competition has been very fierce in the smartphone field, especially in the past few years, and there have been arguably better cameras than the iPhone, but I personally find the iPhone has just been very reliable, and I've really enjoyed my experience using it, being a main iPhone user over the past few years. I think this year with the improvements of like the sharpness, the rendering, and the HDR refinements, those are things that are always very welcome. And as of now, before the Pixel 4 comes out, I believe it is one of the best camera smartphones on the market. With the telephoto camera accepting 40% more light from an f2.4 aperture down to 2.0, I think that is also a great change to see because now it is actually a camera that can be used to take some good photos. Before, the telephoto camera's quality was definitely a little bit behind. It was not as bright, it was not as sharp, but I think this year is definitely a large improvement, and it's something that I'm going to use more than just sending like Snapchat videos to friends where I'm zooming in on something or looking at a sign that I'm too lazy to walk up to. Moving on to the wide camera though, that has been one of the biggest talks this year, and that is the fact that it is 120 degrees and it is finally on an iPhone after seemingly like 2 years of waiting. The camera itself does a very good job in maintaining minimal distortion, but with any wide angle camera you're definitely going to notice that to some degree, but I find that the lighting and exposure was able to keep up pretty nicely with the other 2 cameras despite being at a lower aperture. I will say though, the wide angle camera's photo quality is definitely a little bit noticeably behind compared to the other 2 cameras, and that is totally to be expected with a lower aperture, but I think areas that you will notice it is that just the dynamic range is not as good as the other 2, but that is also the fact that the other 2 cameras are very good. What Apple has actually done is calibrated all 3 of these cameras to be completely calibrated to each other to ensure color consistency between all 3, which is amazing to see because the biggest thing that I noticed with other smartphones was the fact that all 3 cameras were just so distant of each other in terms of white balance and color. When it comes to video recording, the iPhone is once again one of the best on the market, and I think over the years you're really going to notice that Android phones have always been very behind in that aspect, with videos being too saturated, too contrasty, and just a whole different bunch of things aside from Samsung doing a very good job. But the iPhone 11 Pro is able to record up to 4K 60 in all 3 cameras with stabilization on the 2x as well as the main camera. The dynamic range is very good, and it's still one of the only phones that I would trust to use as like a main camera for maybe a travel film down the road, aside from maybe a Samsung Galaxy Note 10.
I'm just trying to do things right nasty. I'm being real, living that life in the rest. Got a new Jacob, if you don't make me test it. Swerving lane and lane, too much rose. Swerving lane and lane, not enough yay. One thing that a night is all working, no play. You know, after work, I play with pussy all day. I hit it and it hurts, and you like it that way. I say it with my chest, nigga, really just a fast white socks and the man's white vibes and the jacks. Really talking Billy, now I got it on this city, cause you know my hit is.
Night mode is also one of the big talks of this phone's camera, and Apple has finally introduced one into their smartphone. So when it comes to night photos, it is obviously the same kind of structure as what other phones has done. The quality of the night photos are very good, and I find that I actually think it looks a little bit more pleasant than what we find on the Google Pixel, which people have said to have the best night mode. It just seems to have more of like a natural look that isn't too extreme to the point where the shadows are completely like artificial, and I feel like that's definitely the better way to go and gives you a more realistic looking image. Although it is nice that we finally have like more editing features built within iOS 13, including being able to crop video and rotate it and not just being able to change the length of it, you still don't have like a dedicated pro mode in the camera app, and you do have to get apps like Filmic Pro or use a dedicated camera app, which is still like not really an issue. I mean, those ones are very, very good, but it would have been nice to have seen like a pro photo mode built into iOS 13 as well.
What's going on, everyone? My name is Sam Elkins. Just thought I would talk about this iPhone. Justin gave it to me for the last couple hours. We were just grabbing dinner and kind of hanging out. This is actually my first time using this phone. I actually just pre-ordered it. It's supposed to come literally in a couple hours, so it's kind of fun to mess around with this phone beforehand. The first thing I do notice though, and right off the bat, especially if you're gonna call this phone a pro phone, I think it's not really fair to say that necessarily and not include RAW mode internally in the camera system. I think the fact that you have to download a separate app for that is pretty annoying. But other than that, I honestly am really impressed with the different focal lengths. I think the wide mode is a little too distorted for my liking personally, but I think if you can kind of like actually frame it up correctly, especially when you're taking a photo of a person. They won't be nearly as distorted if you can kind of get the angle right. I would recommend definitely like a nice flat angle versus kind of tilting the phone up or down. I do love the telephoto mode. You can definitely notice that it's a bit brighter due to the wider apertures. We have an f2 aperture now. Much more light is being let in now, and just overall a much brighter image, especially when the light is coming down. But yeah, this is just kind of my first initial thoughts. I haven't really messed around with this phone too much yet, but just based on that, I can just, you know, noticeably see quite the difference versus my iPhone XS Max right here. So just comparing these two phones, I definitely see quite a difference.
So now that we've talked about the camera, the next biggest change that I think is definitely up there is the battery life. And that is one of the things that I was really looking forward to, because the iPhone XS was a good daily driver, but it just didn't last me through the entire day. I would find myself charging it like at 1 or 2 p.m. and I think by the end of the year I had over 800 charges in just 365 days. If I look back and think about it, I've really never had an iPhone that was able to get through an entire day of usage, but I'm proud to say that this year, this phone actually does last an entire day. On the iPhone 11 Pro, you have a 4-hour battery improvement from the iPhone XS, and on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, you have a 5-hour battery improvement from the XS Max. On paper, the iPhone 11 Pro has a battery size of 3,969 mAh compared to 3,174 on the previous gen. The smaller size iPhone 11 Pro, on the other hand, has a battery size of 3,046 mAh versus 2,658. So with a larger battery size paired with 30% optimizations in the processor as well as 15% in the batteries, as well as iOS 13, you effectively get up to 5 hours of claimed extended battery life on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which I find myself getting maybe 3 to 4 hours of additional use, because 5 is definitely a little bit of a stretch. This year, Apple has opted to stay with a lightning port, but one thing that it didn't stay with for the more expensive iPhones is the 5-watt charger that we all hate. Instead, you get an 18-watt charger that gets you 50% of charge in just 30 minutes, which is great to see. Because at this price point, a phone that just comes with 64 gigs, it is a little bit weird, but the fact that they actually improved the charger is one good step in the right direction. I think the last thing that we need to talk about though is performance and software, because on stage, Apple actually didn't spend that much time talking about that as they normally would, about the spec improvements, the speed upgrades and stuff like that. The brand new A13 chip in the Apple iPhone 11 Pro as well as the iPhone 11 is just about 20% faster than the previous generation, and they really didn't have to do more than that, because I've never once experienced any lag or slowing down on my previous generation iPhone after using it every single day. I think it's just come to the point where silicon technology is just way beyond where it's really needed to be, and phones for the most part are able to take advantage of the processor while not really needing any more power than it already has, aside from incremental upgrades to make it future-proof. iOS 13 in general has been a pretty good experience for me, and I know a lot of people have complained about like some early bugs and some crashes, but honestly, after using this phone, I just haven't really noticed that at all. Everything functions very smoothly, and some of the features that I really appreciate are the improvements in notes, the interface things, as well as the reminders, which really needed an update. I also do like to use the adaptive dark mode, but otherwise there really isn't any major features that are front and center that you're going to notice every single day. The phone itself has been very responsive and just what I've been very familiar with over the many years of using the iPhone as a daily driver, and especially the larger models in the past 3. The one thing that I still don't like though is that the battery percentage is no longer on the top, and I wish that they did bring that back if they had just brought the notch size of the iPhone 11 Pro just a little bit smaller. One missing feature that a lot of us did expect though was reverse wireless charging on the iPhone 11 Pro, and although some people had rumored that this phone did have the hardware for it but it was software blocked, there's really no way to really find out until Zach's jury rig tears his apart. But I think that would have been a nice feature to have, even in the very few cases that you're going to find yourself using it to charge perhaps your Apple AirPods or someone else's phone. From a hardware standpoint, I really thought I was going to notice a weight difference in the new iPhone 11 Pro, but honestly, even though it is about a 20-gram difference, I haven't really noticed it. I mean, it is well distributed throughout the phone, and because it is a large phone, the 20 grams doesn't really make as big of a difference, but the battery life definitely does. But otherwise, what do I think of the iPhone 11 Pro and the iPhone 11 Max, whether or not it is worth the extra $300 price difference from the iPhone 11? Honestly, I don't think you're getting 30% more features on the iPhone 11 Pro compared to the iPhone 11, because the battery life on the mid-end iPhone has always been excellent. I mean, last year's was one of the best of all the phones, including the XS and XS Max. And this year, with the 1-hour improvement coming mostly from the silicon as well as the software, it puts it pretty much close to on par as what you're going to find on the iPhone 11 Pro and the iPhone 11 Max. If you're coming from like the iPhone 10 or the iPhone 8 Plus, I think it is a really good time to upgrade, but if you're coming from last year's iPhone XS, unless you've got to have the camera improvements as well as a wide-angle camera, I really don't see the justifications in spending the money to buy a brand new phone unless the battery life was a major issue and caused you to have to charge your phone multiple times a day like I kind of had to. I feel like Apple's done what they've needed to with this phone, but nothing more than that. And although I'm very excited for next year, you really shouldn't be excited for the next generation phone just a couple days after its initial public release. Otherwise, I've got a video of the iPhone 11 coming up, as well as some other videos of the iPhone 11 Pro, so if you guys want to check those out, make sure you subscribe and have notifications on, and I'll see you all in the next video.